no matter what happens, my daughter isn't coming back to me.
Home, a place meant for safety and love. But for too many women, it's where danger lurks the most. Femicide, the killing of women and girls, is a global tragedy, claiming over 85,000 lives in 2023 alone. Shockingly, most were murdered by people they trusted, fathers, husbands, brothers.
Sì, sono con due mie amiche. Vengono per cena e poi stiamo un po' insieme.
This is part one of a series we could keep making, because the numbers are devastating. But it's time these stories are told. With YouTube's global reach, we hope to raise awareness and spark change. Join us as we uncover femicide murders that shocked the world. Part 1.
Mi faceva piacere salutarti. Ti chiamo io domani magari. Ti va bene? Sì, sono con due mie amiche. Vengono per cena e poi stiamo un po' insieme. Voi state tutti bene? Salutami tutti.
November 11th, 2023, Vigonovo, Italy. Giulia Chettan, a 22-year-old biomedical engineering student, had everything ahead of her. Graduation, a promising career, and dreams she couldn't wait to pursue. But her ex-boyfriend, Filippo Turetta, couldn't accept her moving on. After their breakup, Turetta became controlling and obsessive. On that November day, he convinced Giulia to meet him one last time. Later that evening, consumed by rage, he stabbed her more than 70 times. Desperate to hide his crime, he wrapped her body in plastic bags and abandoned it at the bottom of a ditch. Turetta fled, sparking an international manhunt that ended 12 days later in Germany, where he was arrested. On December 3, 2024, a Venice court sentenced him to life in prison for Giulia's murder, convicting him of voluntary homicide with premeditation, kidnapping, and concealment of a corpse. Giulia's murder devastated Italy, triggering nationwide protests against femicide. Her funeral in Padua drew 10,000 mourners, united in grief and determination for change. Her sister Elena's powerful words still resonate. Giulia's dreams were shattered by the hands of a man who couldn't accept her freedom. As Italy mourned Giulia across the Atlantic, another young woman's life would be extinguished by hate, reminding us that violence knows no borders. July 5, 2022, Toronto's Kipling Station. Commuters rushed through the station, unaware they were about to witness an unthinkable act of cruelty. Tibetan refugee Naima Dolma, 28, had fled hardship in her homeland, searching for peace in Canada. But peace never came. Out of nowhere, Tenzin Norbu, a man with a history of mental illness, doused Naima with a flammable liquid and set her on fire. The attack was as swift as it was brutal. For 36 agonizing days, Naima fought for her life in a hospital bed. Her family, her community, and a shocked city rallied around her. But the injuries were too severe. On August 10th, Naima's light flickered out, leaving behind a grieving family and a city searching for answers. The attack was labeled hate-motivated, a chilling reminder that prejudice can turn deadly in an instant. Naima's story sparked conversations about racism, about the vulnerability of visible minorities, about the work still needed to make our cities truly safe for all. As Toronto mourned Naima halfway across the world, another woman's life would be cut short in a horrifying display of domestic violence, proving that sometimes the greatest danger lies closest to home. July 22, 2018, Guarapuava, Brazil. Tatiana Spitzner, a 29-year-old lawyer, seemed to have it all: beauty, intelligence, and a promising legal career. She was married to Luis Felipe Manvaler, a 32-year-old university biology lecturer. Together, they appeared to be a picture-perfect couple. But behind closed doors, Tatiana endured years of control, manipulation, and violent abuse. That summer night, security cameras captured chilling footage of Manvaler repeatedly assaulting her in their car, their building's garage, and finally, in an elevator. She desperately tried to escape, but he dragged her back inside, beating her mercilessly. The cameras even recorded him coldly cleaning her blood from the elevator walls after the attack. Despite several calls from concerned neighbors, police only arrived after it was too late. They found Tatiana's lifeless body on the street below their fourth-floor apartment, having been thrown from the balcony. Manvaler fled but was caught hours later after crashing his car. He claimed she fell in a tragic accident, but the footage told a different, horrifying story. In 2021, he was sentenced to 31 years in prison for femicide and obstruction of justice. Tatiana's brutal murder forced Brazil to confront its epidemic of domestic violence, sparking outrage and calls for reform. Her voice was silenced, but in her name, millions vowed to speak louder. As Brazil grappled with this tragedy, across the ocean in Canada, another young woman's life would be stolen in a brutal act of domestic violence. Vanessa Viron. June 17, 2022, Brampton, Canada. The early summer sun rose over the quiet suburbs, promising warmth and possibility. But for 29-year-old Vanessa Viron, it would be her last day. Vanessa was a devoted mother whose world revolved around her young son, but her estranged partner, Justin Kuntz, couldn't accept the relationship's end. On that fateful day, he broke into her home and stabbed her multiple times while her son was nearby. Police arrived to find a horrific scene. Kuntz was arrested on site and charged with second-degree murder. In 2023, he pled guilty and was sentenced to life in prison with no parole for 15 years.
It doesn't change anything. No matter what happens, my daughter isn't coming back to me. And my grandson will always be motherless.
Vanessa's death sparked outrage and soul-searching. How could this happen? What more could have been done? In death, Vanessa became a symbol of a fight that's far from over. Her name joined a tragic list of women failed by the system, of mothers whose children will grow up without them. As Brampton mourned across the Atlantic, another young life would be cut short in a similarly brutal fashion, proving that the scourge of domestic violence knows no boundaries. January 2nd, 2012, East London. Just hours into the new year, 20-year-old Kirsty Reilly's life was stolen by the very man who had promised to change. Miles Williams, 19, sent Kirsty a chilling text on New Year's Day. "My New Year's resolution is that I ain't going to hit you again. Love you forever." 7 hours later, Kirsty texted back, saying she didn't want to see him. Enraged, Williams broke into her family home in Hackney, armed with a knife. He stabbed Kirsty 29 times in front of their 26-day-old baby. When her brother Dean and sister Gemma tried to protect her, he attacked them too, stabbing Dean in the chest and slashing Gemma's arm. Covered in blood, Williams dragged Kirsty into his car and drove away. Her body was later found abandoned behind wheelie bins 2 miles from the scene. At trial, Judge Nicholas Cook called the attack exceptional in its brutality. Williams showed no remorse and was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 28 years. The judge's haunting words still echo. That child has been left fatherless and motherless. One day, she will learn that her father killed her mother. As London mourned Kirsty's tragic death, another young woman would fall victim to a brutal, random attack, shattering the sense of safety in an ordinary walk through the city.
I was just thinking what a horrible animal, vile animal he is. And I was just angry, upset, and the fact that he wouldn't answer any questions as well.
September 17, 2021, Kidbrooke, southeast London. Sabina Nessa, a 28-year-old primary school teacher, left her flat for what should have been a 5-minute walk to meet a friend at a local pub. She never arrived. The next day, her body was found in Kadar Park, hidden under leaves. She had been attacked, beaten with a metal traffic sign, and strangled by Koti Selimaj, a garage worker with a history of domestic violence. Selimaj, driven by rage toward women, targeted Sabina at random in a horrifying premeditated attack. At his trial, he refused to show remorse or explain his actions. The court handed down a life sentence with a minimum term of 36 years. Sabina's death reignited a national outcry about women's safety in public spaces, a grim reminder that even the shortest walk can be dangerous. Across the globe in Afghanistan, another woman would face an even more brutal fate, not from a single attacker, but from a mob consumed by hate. In the heart of Kabul, Afghanistan, March 19, 2015, began as a day of spiritual reflection. Fara Malikzada, a 27-year-old Islamic scholar, visited the Shah Do Shamshira shrine. But in a tragic twist of fate, this sacred place became the scene of unimaginable horror. A shrine caretaker falsely accused her of burning the Quran after she confronted him about selling charms, a baseless claim that spread rapidly. Fueled by religious outrage and misogyny, a mob of men attacked. She was beaten with sticks and stones, run over by a car, and set on fire, all while onlookers filmed with their phones. Out of 49 people arrested, 4 men initially received death sentences, though these were later reduced to lengthy prison terms. Many others were set free, sparking national outrage. In death, Fara became a symbol of resistance. Afghan women, defying cultural norms, carried her coffin in protest, forcing the world to confront its failure to protect her. As Afghanistan grappled with this tragedy, across the border in Turkey, another young woman's life would soon be cut short, reminding us that the fight for women's safety knows no boundaries. In the bustling city of Mersin, Turkey, February 11, 2015, began like any other winter day. Uchan Asan, a vibrant 20-year-old psychology student, boarded a minibus to head home. It was a routine journey that should have been unremarkable. Instead, it became her last. The driver, Ahmet Sufi Altandokan, deviated from the route, taking her to a secluded area. What followed was a nightmare of violence. She fought back fiercely, using her pepper spray in a desperate attempt to save herself. But she was overpowered, stabbed, and beaten with an iron rod. Desperate to hide his crime, he enlisted his father and a friend to help burn her body. Turkey erupted in grief and outrage. Altandokan was sentenced to life in prison without parole, while his accomplices received life sentences. In 2016, Altandokan was killed in prison, a grim twist in a story that had already shaken the nation. As Turkey mourned Özgecan, across the continent in India, another young woman's brutal attack would soon shock the world, reminding us that the fight for women's safety is a global struggle that knows no borders. December 16, 2012, Delhi, India. Jyoti Singh, a 23-year-old physiotherapy student, boarded a bus after watching Life of Pi with a friend, a simple night out that turned into an unimaginable nightmare. 6 men, including the driver, subjected Jyoti to a horrifying gang rape and brutal assault. The injuries were so severe that doctors described them as the worst they had ever seen. After a 13-day fight for her life, she succumbed to her wounds. For 13 days, Jyoti fought for her life in hospital, her strength astounding medical staff. But on December 29th, her battle ended. India exploded in grief and rage. Protests erupted across the country, demanding justice, demanding change. The world watched as India erupted in grief and outrage. All 6 attackers were arrested. 4 were sentenced to death, while 1 died in custody. The 6th, a juvenile, received 3 years in a detention center, the maximum for a minor under Indian law. In 2020, after years of appeals, the 4 remaining men were executed by hanging. Jyoti's father declared, "Her name was Jyoti Singh, and I am not ashamed to say it." In death, she became Nirbhaya, the fearless one, a symbol of courage, sparking legal reforms and protests that reshaped India's fight against gender-based violence. As India demanded justice decades earlier in Australia, another woman's life had been taken in a similarly brutal fashion, an act so horrifying it left a nation forever scarred. February 2nd, 1986, Sydney, Australia. Anita Kabi, a 26-year-old nurse, was walking home from the train station after a dinner with friends, a path she'd taken many times before. But this night, 5 men in a stolen car were hunting for a victim. They kidnapped Anita and drove her to a secluded field, where she endured hours of torture, sexual assault, and brutal violence. Despite fighting fiercely for her life, she was ultimately killed. Her throat slit to ensure she wouldn't identify them. Her body was found 2 days later. Her attackers, John Travers and brothers Michael, Leslie, Gary, and Michael Murdoch, were all convicted of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. Their crime shocked Australia and led to sweeping legal reforms in how violent offenders are prosecuted. Anita's parents, driven by unimaginable grief, became outspoken advocates for victims' rights. Her story still resonates today, a stark reminder of the cruelty humanity is capable of and the lasting impact of justice demanded in her name. The stories of femicide are heartbreaking, but turning away won't make them disappear. Every number is a life stolen, a voice silenced, and a future erased. Which of these stories impacted you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe these stories need to be heard, like and subscribe to help us reach more people. This was just part 1. There are far too many lives lost to stop here. Join us next time as we continue to shed light on femicide murders that shock the world.